In this module, we're going to focus on how to use would have with the past. So let's have some examples of this first of all. In English, we might say, I would have done it, but I didn't have time. So here you see the would have like being used in the past. I would have done it. Or you would have been shocked to see how dirty the house was. Here we have, you would have been shocked. Or she would have arrived earlier, but her flight was delayed. If he was there, we would have tried to convince him. So you can see that in English, we're using this would have with the past quite a lot. Now, to do that in Spanish, what we need to do is combine two previous models together. The first step is to grab our auxiliary verb haber and add to that ria. So we know that ria sound represents would with Spanish verbs. And instead of it being habería, it contracts and it goes to habría, which is much easier to pronounce. So this habría stands for would have when we're talking in the past. Now, the other thing we need to do, I suppose step 2, is to add the ado or ido sound. So this is known as the past participle of the verb. This is going to make a lot more sense now as we go through some examples. Let's start from 0 and just take the verb to speak, which is hablar. So here we have the infinitive, the full verb. Now, we know to say I have spoken, that would be he hablado. Here we have the he coming from haber, which means I have, and hablado is the past participle, where we have the ado for AR verbs and ido if it is not an AR verb. So I have spoken, he hablado. Now what we want to do is make the leap into I would have spoken. So the would have is habría, and the spoken remains as hablado. So we get habría hablado. This is I would have and spoken hablado. Habría hablado. If we take an ER verb, say to eat, so we have comer. Now we have ER. And we want to say I have eaten. That would be he comido. Here we have our ido sound, comido, and the e standing for I have. So I have eaten, he comido. Again, we want to make the leap into I would have eaten. So we get habría comido. You see how the past participle doesn't change. So all of that is going to be very familiar territory. What's changing is the would have here. So habría, I would have comido, eaten. Now let's do an IR verb example. To go out, we have salir, salir. To express I have gone out, it would be he salido, he salido. Again, we want to make the leap now to I would have gone out. So you take your habría, I would have, and simply add the same past participle. So habría salido, I would have gone out. So this is more or less how it works with would have and the past. The key thing to take away is that you're going to be using this platform of habría for would have, and we're going to fill out all the rest of the angles very soon. Welcome back to part 2. What we're going to do in this video is fill out all the other angles, and this is very easy. First of all, we have habría, and it's powerful because with that we get I would have, you would have, he, she, or it would have. So all of that contained within habría. Now for you would have, we simply add an S. So you get habrías. Habrías is you would have. Then we would have would be habríamos. So here we have our mos sound for we. Habríamos, we would have. Then finally we need they would have, and that would be habrían, the N standing for they, so habrían. If we put it all on one slide, it would look like this. We have habría, habrías, habría, habríamos, and habrían. You can see all the way down the line, we keep our key sound, this platform of habría. And it's also very important to notice that that stress point remains constant, always over the I. Habría, habrías, habría, habríamos, habrían. Let's take the verb escuchar, which means to listen. And what we want is to get the past participle, in other words, listened. How would you form that? Escuchado. So here we have our ado sound. It was escuchar, the full verb, and that goes to escuchado for the past participle. So escuchado means listened. Now, how would you say I would have listened? Habría escuchado. You would have listened. Habrías escuchado. He, she, or it would have listened. Habría escuchado. We would have listened. Habríamos escuchado. They would have listened. Habrían escuchado. Changing verbs now, let's work with an ER verb, depender, which means to depend. So what's the past participle of that? How would you say depended? Dependido. Here we have our ido sound because it's not an AR verb. So dependido means depended. Now try to say I would have depended. Habría dependido. You would have depended. Habrías dependido. He, she, or it would have depended. Habría dependido. We would have depended. Habríamos dependido. They would have depended. Habrían dependido. Finally, an IR verb will take subir, which means to climb. So again, what is the past participle of subir? How would you say climbed? Subido. Now say, I would have climbed. Habría subido. The word for mountain in Spanish is montaña. So we have la montaña, the mountain. Now try to say, I would have climbed the mountain. Habría subido la montaña. You would have climbed the mountain. Habría subido la montaña. He, she, or it would have climbed the mountain. Habría subido la montaña. The word for ladder is escalera. And it's a feminine word, la escalera. And by the way, if you make that plural, so you would have las escaleras, that means the stairs. So we have escalera for ladder and escaleras for stairs. How would you say we would have climbed the ladder? Habríamos subido la escalera. They would have climbed the stairs. Habrían subido las escaleras. In part 3, we'll look at how to express this idea of would have with been. Now there are two options here. You can say habría sido or habría estado. Now obviously this one is coming from ser, and below that we have from estar. So you're going to have to make those same decisions between ser and estar when it comes to expressing this idea of would have been. Let's take this example. I would have been there. Now, obviously, we're expressing or talking about location here. So we're going to be on the estar side. That means that we would use estado for been. That gives us habría estado allí. I would have been there. We know that the word feliz is happy. So how would you express you would have been happy? Habrías estado feliz. This is another good example because feliz is an emotion and we're simply changing the angle here from habría to habrías. What about this one? He would have been happy to see you. Now, one point I would like to make here is that after happy, you're going to throw in de in Spanish. Try to do it. Habría estado feliz de verte. The word for angry, or at least one of them, is enojado. Or you can say enojada. Of course, these will also go into plurals. So you can have enojados or enojadas. It all depends upon what you're referring to. Let's try to use it. How would you say they would have been angry? Habrían estado enojados. We're continuing to use estar here because we're continuing to talk about emotions. Another one might be relieved. Now the word for this in Spanish is aliviado. Kind of reminds you of the word alleviate in English. And you can have the same variations. So aliviado, aliviada, or plurals, aliviados, aliviadas. How would you say we would have been relieved? Habríamos estado aliviados. Now let's move on to some examples with ser. So how would you say it's good? Es bueno. It's good to see you. Es bueno verte. What about it's been good to see you? Ha sido bueno verte. Now let's make the final leap. It would have been good to see you. Habría sido bueno verte. Here you can see we have the use of habría sido, and this more than often is the case whenever you are expressing it would have been. So this angle with it very often will default or fall into the sound of habría sido. Let's try some more. It would have been fantastic to go there with them. Habría sido fantástico ir allí con ellos. What about this one? It would have been a shame. Habría sido una lástima. It would have been impossible. Habría sido imposible. The word for wonderful is maravilloso or maravillosa. How would you say it would have been wonderful? Habría sido maravilloso. It would have been wonderful to see her. Habría sido maravilloso verla. So there you have examples of both sides for would have been. You will need to make that decision between ser and estar, depending on what it is you're expressing. So you can have either habría estado, along with all the angles, or habría sido. And don't forget that very important tip. When you have it, so the angle of it with would have been, more often than not, you will fall onto the side of habría sido. Let's do a little review now of what we've covered so far. What we're talking about really is would have with the past. And we have this one key slide that opens the door to all of that, where we have habría, habrías, habría, habríamos, and habrían. And then what we do is combine that with either ado or ido, those sounds, how we get the past participle of the verbs. So if we take a verb like to speak, which would be hablar, how would you say, I would have spoken with you? Habría hablado contigo. So literally, I would have spoken with you. What's the verb to pay? Pagar. How would you say, you would have paid the bill? Habrías pagado la cuenta. Here we have, you would have paid the bill. How would you ask, would you have paid the bill? Habrías pagado la cuenta? It's the same thing, we just use the intonation of our voice to make it into a question. Try this one. The party would have been fantastic. La fiesta habría sido fantástica. So we have la fiesta, and we must match it because we're describing that feminine word. So this is why we use fantástica and not fantástico. Then the other thing was we chose ser because we say es fantástica. So therefore we stay on the ser side for it would have been habría sido fantástica. You can see how even in a short phrase, there are still a lot of things that can trip you up. What about this one? We wouldn't have bought the house. No habríamos comprado la casa. If we have, we would have, this is habríamos, we would have what? Well, in this case, it's we would have bought. Habríamos comprado. And to turn that into a negative, the other side, we wouldn't have, we just add in the no at front. So we wouldn't have bought. No habríamos comprado the house, la casa. The word for sooner is más temprano. Más temprano is sooner. How would you say now? They would have arrived sooner. Habrían llegado más temprano. Here we have they would have. All of that is just in habrían. They would have. Then here's the past participle. Llegar goes to llegado. So they would have arrived. Habrían llegado sooner, más temprano. Finally, how would you say they wouldn't have arrived sooner? No habrían llegado más temprano. So again, all we do is throw in the no for they wouldn't have. No habrían llegado más temprano. Now, one final thing that I would like to work through with you in this module is using pronouns and irregular verbs with this would have past, because you're going to come across this a lot. If we take the verb poner, which is to put, right? So we have poner. And in the past, meaning the past participle, put, that would go to puesto. So you can see how it's irregular. Poner goes to puesto, so that we don't have any ado or ido sound here. It's puesto. Now, how would you say I would have put? Habría puesto. If we want to say or introduce it, you put it way up front. So it would be lo habría puesto. Literally, it I would have put. Lo habría puesto. So anytime you get one of those little words, lo, la, los, le, whatever it is, it gets thrown at the beginning of the sentence. So you place it way up front. I would have put it, lo habría puesto. How would you say, I would have put it over there? Lo habría puesto por allí. So por allí is over there. Lo habría puesto por allí. I wouldn't have put it there. No lo habría puesto allí. The verb to do or to make is hacer. And in the past, again, this is irregular. So if we want to say done or made, it goes to hecho. And I'm sure you've seen on labels, hecho in Mexico, for example, made in Mexico. So hecho can be made or done. Now, how would you say I would have done it? Lo habría hecho. So I would have done is simply habría hecho. And again, the it comes way up front. So lo habría hecho, I would have done it. Or literally it, I would have done. The verb to say or to tell is decir. And in the past participle again is irregular. So said or told would be dicho. Again, you can see there's no hint of the ado or ido sound in it because it's irregular. So it goes to dicho. Now, how would you say I would have said it? Lo habría dicho. What about I would have said it to him? Se lo habría dicho. Here we have the it to him. Remember, it could be it to him, it to me, it to them, it to us. And so the it to him is se lo. And then, so to him, it, I would have said. It's probably best not to try to do a literal translation from English into Spanish with these types of examples because everything's backwards. Instead, try to hold on to the structure. So we know that I would have said is habría dicho. And then any little pronouns that we need to introduce, you just throw them at the front before the habría bit. That's probably the best way or the fastest way to do it. So I would have said it to him. We have se lo habría dicho. What about I wouldn't have said it to him like that? No se lo habría dicho así. The main structure here is the same. Se lo habría dicho. We just added the no for I wouldn't have and the así like that. So I wouldn't have said it to him like that. Here we have no se lo habría dicho así. So we have a lot of little words here. This is why they're kind of as ornaments around this main structure. So once you have this main structure, it's easier to put those little words around it. What's the verb to call? Llamar. And what would that go to in the past? The past participle, called. Llamado. Now here we do have a regular verb, llamado. We have the ado sound for called. How would you say, I would have called you? Te habría llamado. Here again, the you can see it gets thrown way up front. Te habría llamado. I would have called you. What about they would have called me? Me habrían llamado. So, me. They would have, habrían, called, llamado. We would have called her. Le habríamos llamado. So this is le meaning to her. We would have, habríamos, called, llamado. How would you say he would have called them? Les habría llamado. Now the les is standing for to them. To them, he would have, habría, called, llamado. So the important thing to take away from this video is that anytime you need to put a pronoun, you place it way up front at the beginning of the sentence. And also to remember that we, of course, have irregulars with these past participles. Not every verb goes to ado and ido. We have examples like poner going to puesto, or hacer going to hecho, or decir going to dicho, and there are many others as well. Let's try one last one. The verb to send, you have a few choices, but let's use the verb mandar. Mandar, to send. Now, how would you say this? I was going to buy it, but it would have been too expensive to send it to you. Be very careful here. Iba a comprarlo, pero habría sido demasiado caro mandártelo. Let's break it down. We have I was going to buy it. We have a handle for that. Iba. I was going to. So I was going to buy it. Iba comprarlo. But it would have been too expensive. If you want to say it's expensive, it would simply be es caro, right, in the present tense. So we fall down the line staying in ser. So it would have been habría sido too expensive, demasiado caro. To send it to you. This is the it to you, tello. Remember, we have 4 choices. We have mello, tello, sello, and noslo for this it to you, it to me, it to them, it to us, or it to him and it to her. All of these things, we hook these double pronouns together. So to send it, right, or just to send, mandar, and then the tello, it to you. So once again, I was going to buy it, but it would have been too expensive to send it to you. I was going to buy it. Iba comprarlo. Pero is but. It would have been too expensive. So it would have habría and been sido. Too expensive, demasiado caro. And then to send it to you, all of this is mandártelo. The it to you is tello, and to send is mandártelo. So again, we have iba a comprarlo, pero habría sido demasiado caro mandártelo. In English, it sounds so simple to reel off something like that in everyday conversation, right? I mean, that is a very natural sounding sentence in English. But in order to convert that type of thing into Spanish, you can see that there's a lot of things that we have to piece together in order to make that work in Spanish, sort of its equivalent. This is why we have to be very careful and try to build the most solid structure that we can around these modules, because when we start to combine them together is the real test of how well you have learned or retained the information that we're going through.